Can you hear me? Yep. Hi, I'm Judy Toller, and I'm from the Elections Committee. We welcome everybody here today. It's a nice turnout. And we thank you for coming to listen to the answers to the questions that the candidates will receive today. We have 8 candidates, and we thank them for offering their time and expertise to the community. Today, Betty Tabor will be our timekeeper, and our moderator will be Jack Spadaro, and he's going to explain the procedures for the day. So I'll turn it over to Jack.
Thank you, Judy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to just kind of run through a lot of the procedures with you so that you'll be familiar with them. All questions will be written on 3x5 cards. They're back there at the back table back there. And if you'll just write your question down, what they'll do is they'll vet it and then get it up here to the table so that we can ask it for all candidates. The questions are basically outlined, or the procedures are pretty well outlined in the latest issue of the Lake Currents. So if you've seen that, you pretty well understand exactly how the situation will work today. Seating of our candidates has already been arranged by the drawing of lots. And as you can see that they're kind of all over the place, but they selected their numbers and positioned them rather quickly. So each candidate will initially have 3 minutes for their respective introduction. Followed by, each candidate will then have 2 minutes to respond to each question as it's asked. So we will go through the introductions first, then we will go through the questions. There are restrooms and water fountains are in the hallway directly adjacent to this building here. And now if you'll please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll start our introductions this morning with Mr. Works here at the beginning. Dirks. See, I said it right that time.
I'm Walt Dirks. My wife, Mary Jane Atwater, and I have owned a home here for over 20 years, and we have lived here full-time for over 5 years. We are very grateful to have Lake of the Woods be our home. I'm running for the board because I quite frankly believe that with my experience and skills, I can help trying to start to heal the division in our community. You may be aware that I'm a chemical engineer and I've practiced law for over 40 years. I'm not going to repeat a lot of the information that's available either on the web or even in the back of the room here. I'd like to just launch into some things that I think are very important that we need to address. I want to talk about 2 things today: communications and fiscal discipline. First, communications. For over 20 years, the association has begun putting things onto the web, and they've made a real effort to do so, but I really think we need to do better. You know, we're customers and we are entitled to have available as much information as possible online. We need to know how our money's being spent, and again, I think we can do better. Let me give you some examples. First, if you go on the web and look at the 2018-2019 budget documents, you see a bunch of references to supporting schedules 1 through 5. Those schedules are not available online. We can do better. The second example, at the end of our fiscal year, we publish an unaudited financial statement. It appears in Lake Currents. But we don't publish the audited financial statement. It's not available online. If you want it, you got to go down to the Holcomb building, dig it out, and if you want a copy like this, you got to pay for it. It ought to be online. It ought to be free. We can do better. If elected, one of the things I will do is work very hard to make sure that much more information is readily available so we, the members, the customers, will know how our money is being spent. Second area, fiscal discipline. I was a partner in a Washington, D.C. law firm for over 30 years. That meant I didn't make any money at all until all the bills were paid. Trust me, you want to have fiscal discipline, that'll give it to you very fast. So I have really decades of proven experience at being a budget hawk. My livelihood depended on it. But a word of caution here. In the past 2 years, the increase in our assessment, the part of the assessment not having to do with CARC, has been below the rate of inflation. This last year, the assessment was below the rate of inflation as far as the increase. Half of that was due to just the increase in medical insurance premiums for our employees. So we have to be a realist. But, we can be a realist and still be very prudent about the way we go about spending our money, and that's what I intend to do and it's what I promise to do. So here's the bottom line. I ask tough questions that nobody else thinks of asking.
Sir.
It's a 250. I can outwork almost anyone, and I will work hard to make LOW a better place for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown?
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for coming out today. I think this is very important that we learn about our candidates. My wife, Carol, is over here. I'd like to introduce her. Please stand up, Carol. I was chastised at the last meeting for not doing that. The reason I asked her to stand, I'll tell you in a moment. A little quickly about myself. I spent 40 years in broadcasting. I got to the top of the heap by working harder than everyone around me. That was instilled in me when I was a child. At 9 years old, Pop gave me a job driving a boat for him while he fished 300 crab pots. At night, we got out at 5 in the morning, worked till 11. While all the other kids were asleep and I was working, and he paid me $5 a week. The next year I got a raise to $6. When I was in broadcasting, I started out with this sorry voice as a disc jockey in Brockton, Massachusetts. They asked if I was from Alabama. That wasn't enough. I wanted more. I moved into television engineering. I went to community college, went into basic training, came back, and I was tonging oysters on the back of my father's boat, and that good woman married me. I still don't know why. But I worked harder than everyone else. I wanted more. I went to an engineering school. I went to a broadcasting school to learn to be that disc jockey. Later, I wanted to move into sales. When I moved into sales, they paid me 9% on new business, 4.5% on existing, which I had none. I had the yellow pages. I worked harder than everyone else. In my 9th month, I got the biggest commission check of anyone in the television station. I later ran radio stations where I was the sales manager. Then I became general manager of radio stations and radio groups and a cable advertising interconnect. I was responsible for both revenue and the expenses. That also meant I had to hire people. It also meant when necessary I had to fire people. My career has prepared me for this job, which is very, very hard. This is not an easy job. It is all hard work. The decisions we make here have to be fair and balanced. We have to balance the needs of today with our plans for the future. Is that 2 minutes? Is that what it is? Great. Thought I was over already. We have to, when you're making this decision today, when you're hearing what we have to say, you want to select a candidate that has solid thinking, good and fair judgment, balanced judgment, and of course the temperament to do this job. It is not easy. For me, what I stand for, basically 3 things: listening to our membership and our committees so that we take that input and form our decisions around that. Secondly, operating within our budgets. Our annual budget, we need to stick with it. We can't jump off base and try something new. We have to plan for the things that are in the future, set the funding aside for them.
Time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Logan?
My name is William James Logan Jr. That's why they call me Jim. I've been here and lived with my wife for 14 years. In fact, next month, 49 years is our anniversary. So thank you, Pat, for putting up with me that long. I took this position, or going to hope to get on the board. I've been on the Finance Committee for the last 6 years. I was chair for 1. I've also on the Elections Committee, and I've recused myself because I'm running for the office. And I also been on the Safety and Security Committee. I believe that one of the major things here is financial responsibility. We cannot continue to take our roads money last year and again this money to push on to other projects. We have the lake, we need to clean it up. It has 3 times the pollution of nitrogen and phosphorus, and the silt is building up so your boat can't even get to the Turtle Island. That was a priority last year, and we're not doing anything, and they kicked it down to 2024, 2026. We have to have assessments that are reasonable and fair. People say our assessments are low. Well, we have 4,257 homes here. So, of course, it's going to be low because we have so many things here, but it doesn't mean we can't be responsible for it. We also have to have, and I think everyone here will probably say it today, we have to have transparency. We can't go to these board meetings and they read a list and tell you, you can ask a question for 3 minutes, but we're not going to answer you. See us afterwards. We need more transparency, we need access to the board, and we need to have them come up to you and say, hey, I have a question, or at board meetings, I have a question, or if there's something that's necessary, I have a question, instead of going to the bylaws and have to get 800 signatures to have them have a meeting so they'll listen to us. My name is William Logan, I'm on the ballot, and I'm running for the board of directors, and I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Debman.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to be here today. The great thing about being fourth is you can agree with the other three people who just spoke. I cannot add anything else I would think to their points. I think you will find that the people who know me personally know that I don't talk a lot. I try to listen. I want to hear what everyone has to say. I can probably assure you I won't agree with everything you say, but I will give you the respect to listen to hear you, because that's what we are. The second thing is a lot of people love to read books. I personally don't like to read books. I like to research. That's what I do. I understand issues. I want to understand issues. I understand the ability to comprehend information fairly quickly, and I will research stuff to the end. You will know that if elected, once I have placed a vote, you will know that I have done research, that I have actually looked at it, understand it fully before I actually cast my vote. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Brown?
Hi, my name is Heidi Brown. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, thank you. I'm Heidi Brown. I've been here about 16 months. My wife, Laura, is in the back. She's been here about 20 years, and my mother-in-law has been here about 16 years. I first want to thank all of you for coming out on this beautiful Sunday afternoon where you could be doing something else. So thank you very much for coming, and for those who will be listening to this either live right now or later on, thank you all for giving this the attention that I think is richly important because all of us have something to say. I also want to thank my fellow candidates with me. All of us are volunteering a great bit of time to do this, as well as their families they didn't know it, but their families have also devoted a lot of time supporting their candidates, so thank you all very much. And for the present and past board members who are out there, thank you for what you have done, because as everybody knows, all these positions and the committee positions are all volunteers. You are giving up your most valuable asset, which is your time, in order to better this community. So like Ralph said, I agree with everything the other folks have said about the community. And while the 8 of us may be coming at this with some differences, there's one thing that we have in common, and that is we love this community and we value its members. I've talked recently about a lot of us came here for various different reasons, but one reason we came here that is common to all of us is this is our home. And it's not just a house, it's our home. And that means something special to each and every one of us. Recently, the board reviewed its mission goals, overarching goals, mission, values, and these are some of the things that they talked about. Diversity in this community is important. It's important to have open communication with all of our members. It is important to be fiscally responsible. It is important for us to keep the value of our homes up. and we do that in a fiscally responsible manner. On my business card, I talk about transparency, common sense, leadership, and integrity. If you vote for me and elect me to this board, I guarantee you that's what I'm going to bring you. Again, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate you all sacrificing this beautiful Sunday afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Furley?
My name is William J. Federley, but you can just call me plain old Bill. My wife Johnny and I moved to Lake of the Woods a little over 3 years ago. Johnny, I know you're short. Would you please stand up? Thank you. One of the reasons we moved to Virginia is we have relatives here, but we also have a grandson down there in Richmond. And 3.5 years ago, he presented us with a great grandson. So it's about family. And they come here quite often, and we visit them quite often, and we just love it here. And Johnny and I, because we're here and we want to be part of the community, we have a vested interest, just like you all do, in making this community a success. I feel like Walt, I was in law too, but I wasn't a lawyer. I was a lieutenant in the Cleveland Police Department. And I feel because of my management supervisory skills that I can greet this job and do the very best I can in a very objective manner. Like Jack Webb used to say on Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. So, and I also believe that each and every member of this community is an equal. Everybody has something they want to say. Sometimes the communication gets lost where people start to talk at each other, and I think we're talking past each other. We got to bring it back into the common fold where we have that communication again. And that's going to take decorum, respect for your fellow neighbor, and you have the conversation. Because if you start shouting out or being derogatory and make personal attacks, your message that you're trying to convey gets lost in the performance and the way you deliver it. And that's not what we're about. I don't think that's what any of you want. I know that's not what Johnny and I want. So everybody has opinions, and we don't always agree. And I know from my life experiences that you cannot please 100% of the people 100% of the time. But if you got people at this end and people at this end 180 degrees apart and they're knocking heads, we're not going to go anywhere. If the rest of the world is moving forward, we stand still, we're actually going backwards. So what we need to do is take all the information and all the input from all our members, open the lines of communication as previously stated, and take those best ideas and make it so that we as a group, as a community, move forward. There's an old adage that says to have a friend, you have to be a friend. Let's change that. I'm going to put an adjective in there, the word good, and instead of friend, neighbor. If you're a good neighbor, you're going to have a good neighbor. If we all have that in our process and it expands community-wide, we're going to have one fantastic community here. So we can all move forward as a unit and stop this petty bickering and stuff that's going on. It makes no sense. We're just digging a hole. You know what they say about holes? If you're in one, stop digging. So I plan, if elected, to keep an open mind. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Priester.
There we go. Hi, everybody. I'm Alan Priester, and I want to also add my thanks for each of you coming out today to giving up some of your weekend, which is precious, I know, to get to know your candidates up here. We all do appreciate that as well. I encourage you, if you haven't done so already, and I see some of you have our bios, please look through those bios. Those outline what we all bring to the table to serve you. And that's what the board is here to do, is to serve you. Now, for my bio, there's 2 points I would like to call your attention to. First, I have lived here in the lake for 20 years. During that 20 years, I have seen lots of changes. Most of them good, some not so good. But still, there's one thing that has not changed in those 20 years. And that's that feeling I get when I come inside that gate, where I feel like my cares of the world are left on the outside, and I feel safe, accepted, and relaxed here in the lake. And it's that feeling that I want to help maintain as your director. The other point I wanted to bring your attention to is 35 years of project and program management for several organizations and currently for the Federal Reserve. So what, you might ask? What does that have to do with the board of directors? Well, what that means is I've spent 35 years of working collaboratively with my customers and to gain consensus, to identify their pieces of work, to put budgets against their pieces of work, to justify those pieces of work and those budgets based on revenue and return on investment, then prioritizing that pieces of work to make sure that the most important items are done first, and then leading teams to deliver that work all within cost and schedule. So hopefully this is something that you see value in for the board of directors. Now what I stand for, I stand like these others for financial responsibility, except I would like to bring some of the discipline that I've had to bring that additional financial responsibility to the board. However, as I had mentioned, this has to be done with collaboration with you. We've got to have your input. Consensus, we've got to agree on what needs to be done, and above all, transparency, so that you can be sure that we're doing the job that you're electing us to do. The other thing that I stand for is to fully fund and protect our reserve fund for the emergencies that will happen. And if you want a little out-of-the-box thinking, I would actually like to see that our association employee performance evaluation program be expanded to allow for incentives for our employees that actually have cost reductions or cost avoidances, and disincentives for those that overrun. So with that, I want to thank you all very much again, and I appreciate your vote.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ternoy?
Again, I'd like to repeat what everyone else has said about thank you for coming. I know that this was going to be a very short time, so I put some notes so I can... A little bit of levity. Everyone else has talked about what they want to do, and I'm in agreement with the majority of that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. 14 years, in my 14 years of high school and college, I was in 4 different states in high school. For my last 4 years, I was married for 51 years, short a week. I've got 7 grandchildren who live, 4 of them in this area, 2 of them up in Connecticut. My wife stayed at home, and we survived on a single income until our youngest was in high school. The divorce last year put me in a financial bind that makes it impossible for me to make any kind of a move. So some people say, okay, if you can't afford to live here, move. I cannot. I'm in a position where I can't. I had 4 years in the Army. I was in Vietnam in 69, 70. 25 years of retail management and sales, 15 years as an insurance agent and broker, and during that time I spent 18 years delivering newspapers every morning, driving 32 miles and delivering 150 papers on a rural route just to make ends meet. That is my financial background, and very limited, and one of the reasons you won't see any of my signs on people's yards, because I don't have the money to spend for that. I've spent a couple $100 trying to get elected to a position that's going to take 20 hours a week and pay nothing, and I'm willing to do that. I've been in the development for 6 years, love every bit of it, and have been very active. One of the things I've tried to do in the last few weeks is get to as many committee meetings as I can, and I'd like to thank the 200 or so volunteers that work on those committees. They are the backbone of this organization, and their recommendations go to the board for final decisions. The board, we were told the other day that the board has final say whether we want to do something that's immoral, wrong, not right for the community, or whatever. It's still legal for us to do that. I want to act within that law, but also keep things moral, just, and even for everyone. As a final on this, people have talked about thanking their spouses and so forth. Patricia, would you please stand up? Trish has been my rock during the tough year I had last year, and she had a tough year also. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, you've completed the first phase. We've completed our introduction phase. Now to move on to the questions. Mr. Brown, we'd like to start with you this time. Are you encouraged that middle-income seniors and young families could not have reasonable expectations with regard to recent, large, and rising annual assessment costs?
Would you repeat the question, please?
Be happy to, sir. Are you concerned that middle-income seniors and young families could not have reasonably expected recent, large, and rising annual assessment costs?
Thank you for repeating the question, because at first I thought you say, are you encouraged that they can't? No, of course I'm concerned with that. Everyone probably up here is concerned with that. This is a wonderful place to live, and we are a diverse community that has one class of membership. It is in our charter. There's only one class of membership. We are all of equal standing. We all have access to the same amenities, the same quality of lifestyle. Affordability for that, we want to make sure that it continues. I would be lying if I said we can lower the cost of our assessments. That just simply can't happen with inflation and other things. But we have to try to keep the balance, as I said earlier, of our needs of today with our plans for the future. It is imperative on this board or any other subsequent board to try to do that, to try to balance that. We want to make sure that young people find ways to stay here. I'd like, as an older person, I hope I can stay here. But yes, I am concerned. We'll certainly pay attention to it. We'll hear what people have to say. And on that note, anyone after this meeting, please come to me with your questions. If I haven't met you, I'd love to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Just as a reminder, panel members, that you'll have 2 minutes to finish your reply to these questions. Thank you again, Mr. Brown. Mr. Logan, would you like me to repeat the question for you?
Yes,
Does this work? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
if you would.
Are you concerned that middle-income seniors and young families could not have reasonably expected the recent large and rising annual assessment costs?
I believe that the assessments that go out should be reasonable, but they should also be cost-effective. The rise in the assessments are generally caused by having capital projects for which we haven't saved any money for, and we don't know even what the final cost is. We're taking out a $5 million loan. We've also taken off a tremendous amount of money from other areas, including a reserve. We also go out and buy, let's give me an example, a pickup truck. It just passed inspection. It's only used for service, and it just runs around here. But because it has age, we pay $38,000 and buy a new one. Assessments go up when you don't watch the budget. We have not been watching the budget. We have a lot of things here that they saw the budget and they've overrun every one of them, or not all of them, just about 3, I think. But that's the reason why the assessments are going up. And we have to have better financial responsibility to stay within our budget that we had all agreed to, Finance Committee, planning, and when we did it in October last year, and it's not being done. So if we keep those down, the assessment will be reasonable. And if we have a $5 million loan and we're going over 7 years, why can't we extend it a little bit for people who are having trouble? People, these are forever homes. They're not going anywhere, and we're forcing them out because we're not following the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Debnant.
Okay. We've gone through periods. I remember in the early 2000 time frame, we were averaging very low 2-3% increases. We went through a period, I believe, in the mid 2005, 2006, where we went to double digit. And, you know, if you look at the increases that have occurred, I agree with Jim in the context that we have gone on a capital spending spree, if I can use that term, over the last 5 or 6 years. Some of it was justified, some of it was very required, and I understand the need of balancing the two contexts between the ability to make sure that we're not pricing people out of this market. It's important that we as a community address that. I've had conversations with various people. It's not an easy problem to solve, but it's something that we definitely need to take a strong look at. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Brown?
So my short yes, I don't need it repeated.
Okay.
So my short answer is yes, I'm concerned about it. I'd love to tell everyone that assessments are going to remain stable or go down, but I don't know what I don't know yet. And I have had the opportunity, as I've been putting signs out, to meet a lot of different people. People who are, women who are widows, others who have told me, this is my happy place. I don't know how long I can stay in my happy place, but I hope I can stay in my happy place until I die. And I agree with that, because as I said previously, this is our home. I agree with the other candidates. If we are better managing our budget, I think that it makes it more affordable. But this is what I would tell you. If we know long in advance that we absolutely have to increase an assessment, like anybody, I would want that information as soon as possible so I can budget for it. And so so that I don't have to leave here, so that there is some type of a payment plan. I think it's wrong to think, as somebody stated, or I think it was Terry, the option is to leave. I don't want you to leave. This is your happy place. This is your home. It is concerning because a lot of people are here on fixed incomes. It is all of our home, and I respect that. I want to figure out how we can make it everyone's forever home and keep those assessments down with more fiscal responsibility across everything that we do here. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Furley?
Yes, you don't have to repeat the question. Yes, I'm also concerned. I don't know how true this is. Maybe some of you people have been here 30, 40, 50 years can enlighten me further, but I've heard through the grapevine that when this place was first being developed 50 years ago, a company named Boise Cascade was in the business of selling lots. And to make people want to come here and live here, they put in certain amenities, clubhouse, a pool, and the rest. Maybe not everything we have today, but they made it attractive. Well, there comes a point, if you're in sales business to sell lots, that you sell the majority of the lots and it's time to turn it over to the HOA. Well, they did. And I'm not faulting the old boards or anything. I just think they didn't have the foresight to look at the shelf life of buildings, amenities, equipment, and say, well, this is going to last 10 years, this will last 15, this will last 50, this will be 45. And there was no provision to salt away some money in the assessment while maintaining it lowly. They could have had a fund where to offset so they don't get hit with a $5 million loan. Now, that being said, we're here today. Yesterdays don't count anymore. We have to move forward. So these projects are in line, but yes, I am concerned. And there are people in the audience, I know, that I like to contribute my time free of charge. I've done a couple Christmas shows for Low Links. I did a fundraiser for Low Links. They tell me I can sing, I don't know. But I don't mind contributing without any cost coming to me. I don't want any remuneration. But if we could set up maybe some kind of a fund where charity, that somebody who's really up against it, an 80 or 90-year-old woman getting $800 a month, she's deciding between pills and cat food now, if we could help them in some way. After all, they're in they're in the December of their lives. And it wouldn't be a long-term program, but at least these people make them more comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Priester?
Okay. Yes, I'm very concerned about the rise in assessments. As I'm just, in my career, I'm just about to transition into the fixed income realm myself. So I'm very interested in seeing cost control and financial responsibility when it comes to the assessments. Now the assessments, what drives the assessments, there's two sides. There's a cost side and there's a revenue side. So we need to work together collaboratively with you and the community as well as the board and the general manager to see where we can not only cut costs on the cost side, but also some interesting new ideas perhaps on how to generate more revenue. Because right now our revenue is driven by assessments out of your or my pocket, and also on fees on our amenities and infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Taranoy?
Yes. Again, based on my background, I'm very concerned, and that is the reason I ran for the board to begin with. The CART project being the primary factor in that. The extra $191, when you really break it down, it's $15 a month. Most of us somehow or another can afford $15 a month. But that's a 7-year commitment of $15 a month and almost $200 a year, which is more than a 10% increase in your association fees. So yes, I am very, very concerned with that, not only for my own benefit, but from the standpoint of the middle income and the retirees and the young people here who are working, some of them 2 or 3 jobs, to try to make a living and supply and provide a good home for their children. I appreciate the amenities. I try to make use of them. And again, going back to the 20 committees that we have that really run this place, and it was something I was not familiar with until I started running for the board. Those committees do a very good job of trying to control their costs and submit budgets that are within. It's up to the board to withstand the pressures of inflation and the desire to have a Taj Mahal instead of a swimming pool. And that's my goal right now, is to make sure that that project comes in on time and on budget, because I can't do anything else about it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dirks?
It'll come as a very big surprise that I say I'm concerned. Terry said something I think is important here, that we're at a point with the CART project where the important thing here is to bring it in on time, on budget, and then we also have to integrate it into existing operations. I've been an engineer, and one of the things I've always found out is whenever you integrate a new facility into existing facilities, you find out some things about integrating it that are difficult, and we have to work through those things in a cost-effective way. Now, with regard to the assessment, as I mentioned briefly, the last 2 years our assessment increase, except for CARC, had been less than a rate of inflation. The assessment's up 3.73% in the last 2 years. Inflation's up 4.5%. The Congressional Budget Office is predicting another 15% increase in medical insurance rates next year. So we're staring at a fairly difficult situation going into this thing. And that gets back to what I said in my opening remark, that my background is to be a budget hawk, to look carefully at what's being spent, be prudent, but we have to be realistic. We have got to try very hard, but we're dealing with a relatively daunting situation here, if for no other reason than just the simple fact that we're going to get hit with a rate increase next year for medical insurance that is going to be unpleasant. But we have to work on it and work hard. That's it.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to the next question now, and this time we'll start with Mr. Logan. Mr. Logan, can you explain how you see the relationship between management and the board, and how you plan to interact with the general manager?
It's a good question. The board is elected as, in fact, they follow the procedures in our governing documents. The general manager then follows their direction according to our rules, our bylaws, and our governing documents, and the board oversees to make sure that that is done. The general manager usually has an assistant manager, and basically, they run the place with oversight. And I think the board and the general manager have to work in sync. And sometimes I think they work in sync so much that you only see 2 footsteps. I think that the community here has a right to have a say and to also look at what's being done and have input. And I think that is the missing of the 3 prongs. Right now, we have very little information. We see one bid instead of the 3 required for over 25,000. We don't know what's going on. We don't know these projects. We have the M&E building they tore down. They had money for it, but now they find out they can't use the foundation, so that's more money. There has to be more information to us. We're paying the bills, and we need to know where that money's going, that it's going the right place, and it's being spent the way it's supposed to. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dedman.
Thank you. I have had a lot of interactions with Phil over the last 4 or 5 years. The gentleman is extremely smart from an operational standpoint. And everything that I've spoken with him, he's been right on top of what's going on. The problem I have had with Phil is there seems to be not a level of transparency. And I'm a strong believer in that context. The board obviously sets policies. Phil is there to implement those policies. I think the board has abdicated a little too much responsibility to Phil. I would like to see that cut back. And I would like to see more transparency applied to the board and to Phil. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Brown?
So it was one of the questions that we were asked in our Channel 18 interview, and I think, I did the research, and I think Jim articulated it quite accurately. You all elect your board then hires a general manager. The general manager is responsible for the day-to-day operations of this community. The safety, the security, the infrastructure, the facilities, etc. Dovetailing off of what Ralph said, I do believe that why this question is being asked again is because in practicality, there appears, because of a lack of transparency or perceived lack of transparency in communication, that the general manager is running everything and the board is not. So I understand the reason why you asked that question completely. And I agree with both gentlemen, and I think everyone is going to say the same thing. We need to change that perception, because that perception is our reality. And it does, this community needs to be governed by the board who you elect, and have those things, the day-to-day operations, run by the general manager. And so there are distinct lanes for everybody. I think they're blurred right now, and I believe that if you elect me, I will absolutely do my very best to make those lanes very clear. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Furlick?
Yeah. In any organizational chart, this is a corporation. And if you belong to a corporation, you own shares in a corporation, the members of the stockholders elect a board, the board of governors or whatever. They go out and they might hire a president who doesn't own a share of stock. He's to handle the day-to-day operations as previously stated. But to get to the quick and the end of this real quickly, The buck, as Terry Truman said, the buck stops here. If you're on the board, we're responsible. We have to answer to each and every one of you. And I think a way to improve that is to have more town halls, get more input. And I know I've attended board meetings where you get 30, 40 people in the audience. We got over 4,000 homes. Where is everybody? On one side, they say they're not represented. On the other side, they don't participate. And if we got them all in here, we got to build a new building. We'll never fit all those people in here. We'll be in violation of the fire code. But really, the buck stops here, and you just can't run willy-nilly, and somebody says, well, we need this now, we need this now. Okay, 3 bags full, rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber. You can't do that. You have to look into it, and you got to make sure the reserves are fully funded. It's just common sense, folks. It's just common sense. You can't run your household budget like that. You know your roof's going to last 15, 20 years. You're not surprised when it starts dripping inside because it's 22 years old. You got to have the money there. You know this is coming. Your cars, it's all the same thing. This is just like running your family budget. There are just more digits to the left of the decimal point. That's it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Priester?
You know, the disadvantage of being at this end of the table is all these guys, cover the points that I was thinking about covering. So, just to, reemphasize, the general manager serves, at the pleasure of the board, period, paragraph. He is responsible for day-to-day operations, running the infrastructure, and carrying out the board's policies and directions. He is encouraged to make recommendations to the board, but the board is responsible for deciding, and should be in collaboration with you, the members, to ensure that the direction and the policies that the board is giving to the general manager is in consonant with what you want. So other than that, I agree with all these guys.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Terran.
Well, as I said in a previous get-together we had, I was in retail management for the better part of 25 years. And in retail management, it's a little bit different in that when you move a manager around, he stays within the same company. So it doesn't lose benefits, doesn't lose seniority, and so forth, and establishes a reputation. But the reason for retail management moving around is to get new blood, new ideas, and not have people get complacent in what they're doing. Now, I'm not saying that that's what has happened here, but it does happen over a period of time with most any organization. So new blood is really critical. In defense of Phil, I've met him on a number of occasions. I've seen him at many of the committee meetings that I've gone to. He seems to be a very active, hands-on participant, seems to be doing a very good job. He has good suggestions, and he was very knowledgeable. A couple of weeks ago, we had a planning session looking at long-term plans and next year's plans. It was a 2-day session. I was out of town for the first day, but the second day I attended that meeting. And Phil had a lot of very good things to say and was very good at questioning the board, what they wanted, and how he was going to be expected to accomplish those goals that the board was setting for him. So that being said, everything seems to be good, other than some of the things that were said about the transparency and making sure that the general membership has a vote, and that's one of the things that I think we should definitely have a vote on any major project. We should be given at least 2 options for any major project. We weren't given that in this past year.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dirks?
Sure. I've heard a lot of people talking about the transparency point, which is what I made in my opening statement, particularly with regard to financial information. Because to some extent, if you're on the board, unless the membership actually has this information, they're not really in a very good position to tell you how they feel about it. So this gets back to my point about we need to make sure that more information is available in the community so the community is informed and can express opinions to the directors about the direction that they want to have, and particularly on particular issues which involve the spending of money, which in an HOA, almost everything ultimately goes back to money. Another thing to remember about the board is when you're a member of a board of directors, you act through the board as a whole. If I'm on the board of directors, I'm not a lone ranger out there. I can't do anything unless I can persuade 3 other people to vote for it, so it is an action of the board. And I think that lots of times when we look at the way a board operates, we forget that the individual board members, they're not the lone ranger. They have to work as a group. And lots of times that takes longer and it can get frustrating, but you always have to remember we're working through a group, and one of the things I intend to do is work very hard to get at least 3 other people to agree with proposals to deal with some of the issues we're confronting today.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. The original question was, how do we see our board working with the general manager? The general manager is an at-will employee of the board, as was stated by Alan. The board is responsible for policy, for setting the goals, and the general manager is responsible for the day-to-day operation, and he does that job, and I think he does a good job of that. Have there been stumbles? Perhaps so. What we have to be concerned about, the 8 of us up here, is from this day forward. The transparency issues, the directions that we help set, the guidance that we give to our general manager, all of those things are what will be what determine how we proceed. It's hard to change the past, but the perception is reality. If we have a perception that we're not getting information, there are tons of information available to us. Walt pointed out perhaps more financial information should be available, audited statements, etc. All of that is good. And I encourage you, like Bill said, there's 150 to 200 people here out of 4,200 homes or 8,000 plus members. I am encouraged that you're here today. We give the information out. Hopefully people pay attention to it. Hopefully we get more information out. But what we're dealing with here is going forward. It will be on those of us you elect today or during this election to determine how transparent, to determine how fair, how balanced we are we holding our management to the standards that we set for them. That will be the decisions we have to make. And I hope that you will see that that is something I have done my whole career. I've been on the receiving end as a general manager for corporations, responsible for revenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We'll now move to our next question, and we'll start this with Mr. Dedman. Do you support controlling, perhaps reversing annual expenditures exceeding the board-approved annual budget authorization? Be happy to. Do you support controlling, perhaps reversing annual expenditures exceeding the board's approved annual budget authorization? I don't write this stuff, I just...
Let me see if I can understand or properly understand the question. There are goals that are set. There are monetary expenditures that we have to make. Those are established. I agree that we have to look at each individual expenditure, understand what it is that we're trying to achieve, make sure that we are properly spending the dollars that we need for the community. There's a balancing act that you have to create, and I would not roll back unless I believe that there's something that is just extremely out of line. But the board goes through the budget process every year, It analyzes all of that information, so I'm not sure that it is anything, once it's approved, I'm not sure there's anything that would need to be rolled back.
Thank you, sir.
I am
Ms.
going to
Brown,
have
would you like to take a crack at this?
I would like you to repeat it one more time because it's a complicated question.
Do you support controlling, perhaps reversing, annual expenditures exceeding the board's approved annual budget authorization?
So there's an implication that the board is exceeding their annual budget allocation. So that's interesting because, as Ralph just said, there is a very extensive budget process. It involves all the different committees. It involves member input into developing that operating budget. I'm trying to think about what the real intent of that question was, and perhaps it is that there are different entities within our community that they exceed their budget, and then money is shifted between different amenities, if you will, in order to compensate for those overages. I have a problem with that. If, 36 years in the Army, if I went over my budget, I probably wouldn't have been in the Army for 36 years. I believe in you set a budget, and you should be looking at that budget all the time. And you shouldn't be setting a budget that is unrealistic. You have a historical documentation, etc. I don't like the shell game because there are winners and losers. And I really think that that's what the genesis of this question is. And so I don't think you can reverse, but I definitely want to be an active player in the development of the next year's budget, should you elect me, and get after this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr.
I concur with the prior two speakers up here. But if the projects are ongoing and we see cost overruns, how do we handle that? We're supposed to have an adequate reserve fund for these things. And I don't think they're being fully funded right now. I really don't. Now, I don't know if my numbers are right. I heard a year ago we had 1.5 million in a reserve fund, and about 2 months ago it was down to less than 600,000. So if you get a major cost overrun that's going to be 1.2 or $2 million, what are we supposed to do? Get out the credit card? I can't do that in my household. We can't do it here. So maybe what would happen at the new board, if something happened in 6 months from now, and it's November, December, or January, and they're in the middle of a project, we might have to slow it down or figure out another way to compensate for that overage. There's got to be a way, and like it was previously mentioned, they draw from other funds to override and fill in the blanks. Well, then something else suffers. We don't want anything to suffer. We have a lot of amenities here, and everybody, if you're an avid golfer, you want the golf course to be El Primo. If you're a boater, you're concerned about the lakes and the docks. If you use the clubhouse a lot, you want that to be a number one. So no matter what you do here, certain amenities are very important to certain people. But should we shortchange any of them? No. That's what makes our diverse community so great. There's something here for everybody. I always tell people, if you're here and you get bored, there's something wrong with you. There's more activities and things and clubs and things to do to contribute your time to, charities, whatever, than there are minutes in a week. I didn't say hours, I said minutes in a week. So this is a problem that'll have to be looked into. Unfortunately, we can't address it until that overage would come to light. And then we'd have to tighten our belt and see where we could draw the money from. But I agree with the previous two statements wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Priester.
Okay, that was a very interesting question. I guess in my mind, in my experience, a budget is a budget. And the reason that, in my experience, I've always, worked with my customers, in this case, you all will be my customers if I'm elected as your director, that prioritizing the projects throughout the budget year is most important. Why? Because if something overruns that's important, there's something down at the bottom of the list that's not as important, may need to be cut and pushed into next year. This is a business, by the way. So, and unless there is a definite emergency that causes us to dip into our reserve fund, that should be left alone. So my belief is that we should look at prioritizing our projects and that work, and with the understanding that something that's a lower priority may need to shift to next year if there's overruns and our budget is considered sacrosanct.
Thank you. Mr. Ternoy.
The short answer, yes. I again, in retail management, had to live by budgets or die by budgets. And again, as Al just said, if you come up against something that is going to run over budget, you have to find that money someplace else. And it means that maybe some other facility does have to suffer, but you have to weigh that and stay within the budgets. Unfortunately, in this development, the budget process that I have read extensively from last year's was nearly a 2-month process. A lot of input was given to the board, a lot of thought and justification went into it by the various committees. The 2 committees that I've been to that really control a lot of this is the Planning Committee and the Finance Committee. And they are very dedicated, they do a very good job, and I'm looking forward to working with them.
Thank you. Mr. Dirks?
Okay, I have it going now. We have a contingent, is it working? Okay, it's on. We have a contingency reserve. That's supposed to be for large, unanticipated expenditures. And I think we have to insist that it be used that way. There's always a temptation to view something like that as a fund of money that's available to plug a hole. Large, unanticipated expenses, that's what it's supposed to be used for. The other thing that I've seen dealt with over and over and over again, the board has done a pretty good job on it, is resisting impulse purchases. Put it over to the next fiscal year so it goes through the process. Impulse purchases, the temptation's always there to do it, you have to resist it. With regard to the ongoing thing, one of the ways to keep things in control, again, goes back to having all the financial information readily available. Transparency is important. Having it online is important. So every one of us knows what's going on as close to a real-time basis as is plausible given the realities of accounting and everything else. But we really need to take into account the fact that if we're going to spend more money somewhere else, we got to find a place to save some money. The problem is, it's not just an expenditure side, it's a revenue side. The golf course has gotten killed this spring because you can't play when it's soaking wet. Obviously, they're going to have a shortfall this year, and things are going to have to be done to try to address that. So it can come on 2 sides. Expenditures are higher than you expect, or revenue is less than you expect. And we have to really be prepared to address both of those. And it's an ongoing process. We have to be budget hawks.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown?
Okay, back to the original part of, am I in favor of undoing something that's been done? I think that's what that says. Things that our duly elected representatives have put in place, I think should go forward. If there's something egregiously wrong with it, and that we've simply had overruns, we have to deal with that. We have to be able to fund it. We have to realize that all of our amenities are subsidized to some degree. That revenue coming into those is subsidized by part of our assessment. They're not money makers. They're not going to be money makers. However, they do generate revenue, and we have expenses. So when an operating budget is mandatory, it's a goal. Goals are mandatory. When I was in sales, when I ran businesses, goals were mandatory. An airplane, if you get on that plane, if the pilot's flying, you want his goal to be mandatory. You want to land in Cleveland when you're going to Cleveland. It's not a target. It's not some maybe we could get there. You want to get to Cleveland if you're flying to Cleveland. That's the way we have to operate a budget. what I was saying in my initial thing is the prioritizing. Someone else mentioned that. Our long-term projects should be prioritized in order of importance. What we don't want to do is get left in the mode where we're dealing only with urgency. Something relatively unimportant left to the last minute becomes urgent. That's when it usually costs more money. So we plan our work, and if you look online, you look in our 5-year plan, we're now extending to a 10-year plan. In the overarching goals meetings, the board talked about extending to 6 to 10 years. So they're thinking in terms of a longer view of what our needs might be. As those needs come up, we have to set the funding aside to fulfill them. I believe the number thrown out a moment ago about the amount of reserves was incorrect. Thank you. Do it every time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Logan.
Let me put on my other hat. I have been on the Finance Committee for almost 6 years, chair for one. And we do sit through a budget process. It's quite extensive. We set goals, we set budgets. And we've had 50 years of experience to know what we need to budget. We take in account for inflation and everything else. Every month, we have a meeting. The treasurer of the board is there, and the vice chair of the committee and the chair. We go over through the budgets, how they're doing, and everything else. And yet, time and time again, by 3/4 of the way through the budget process, we find they're already over their budgets. General manager is responsible to keeping them within their budget. And when you see that happening, we need the board to step in and say, you're over budget, why? Find out what the problem is, solve that problem, and make sure we come in on budget. Otherwise, where we go again, we're going to take it out of contingency fund. Well, we've already done that. They're going to take it out of the reserve. That's been depleted a lot this year already. We can't work like that. We don't have an open checkbook and we don't have a credit card. We're now going for $5 million because we didn't put the money away. And the first question I get is, where's the money we're supposed to put away? We had 50 years to do this, we had this to do that. The budget is the budget. If it's an emergency, fine. Use the contingency fund, use everything. But we shouldn't do it year after year and have an open checkbook. We've got to slow down and make sure people do their job. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're going to start a new question, and we'll start this one with Ms. Brown. What prior experience have you had with being responsible for budgeting, implementing budgets, and supervising expenditures by personnel?
The short answer is 36 years in the military. I certainly have had to develop budgets. I've been given budgets that I had to live within. Or suffer the consequences of not having enough money. I've been fortunate to be in organizations where if some of my sister units were not spending all of their money at the end of the fiscal year, I put my paw in the air and already had all my paperwork done for me to go in and scoop up their money so that I could pay down some of my next year costs. So I've had extensive experience from the thousands of dollars to the millions of dollars. And in one of my previous jobs, for instance, where I started out with a $425 million a year budget for my organization, and my boss cut me down to $225 million in a year, and said, do the same thing that you did previously. I was the director for testing at the Missile Defense Agency. He said, do the same thing for half the money. And we did. So I've had a lot of experience. I bring that experience forward if you were to elect me to this board. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Furley?
Well, I think she's outdone us all on that one. The only thing I can tell you is I served 2 years in Florida on a condominium owners board of directors. I was the treasurer. We were always in the black, and that doesn't compare to $400 million, I know, but But on the other hand, on the lighter side, my wife is a professional shopper. I told her, do you need money? She said, no, I got plastic, yeah, so, but that's on a lighter note. But really, if you use a common sense, I like to make a little levity every now and then, but if you use common sense, you can't, it'd be like me going out and buy a 750 IL BMW for $130,000 with a V12 engine, and I'm on pension. That would be stupid, and you'd be looking at me like, what's wrong with that guy? So again, it's just common sense, taking the information from the committees, from the members, see what are being put to you from the management and their needs, and arrive at a decision. Like I said before, the buck stops at the board, period, the end. If you're going to make us responsible, you got to give us commensurate authority. The tail cannot wag the dog. And we have committees, and they give information. I think they should strictly adhere to that, and also the members. After all, nobody up here is any different than you. We're all in this together. So that's all I have to say on that one. Again, common sense. It's my pledge.
Thank you, Mr. Priester.
Okey doke. As mentioned in my opening remarks, I don't quite have 36 years, but I've done 35 years as far as program and project management. In the case of program management, very similar to what Heidi indicated. It's like building a house. You're the general contractor, and each of your projects is for building your foundation, building your framing, putting together your roof, what have you. So each of those projects have their own budgets as such that must be followed. So, and every project manager lives and dies by his budget. There are three, constraints that are put on a project manager. That's, cost, schedule, and scope. So if one starts to grow, then one of the others have to make up for it in that iron triangle of cost, scope, and schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chernoy?
Well, again, going back to my 25 years of retail experience as a store manager, an assistant manager, operating manager at times, had to deal with monthly budgets, deal with cost overruns, sales shortages, sales overages, returned goods, those kinds of things all came into play on a regular basis. But I had large corporations standing behind me and helping. What was more important from my standpoint was my own personal. Never made an awful lot of money and managed to live my life debt-free. I don't have a house payment. I don't have car payments. I don't have any debt at all now. And it's because I've been very fiscally conservative. I drive older cars. I don't buy new cars. The last new car I bought was 1981. So that gives you an idea. I watch every penny I spend.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dirk?
I guess if you live long enough, you finally get to claim you've done something longer than anybody else. I actually have 45 years worth of budget experience. Back in the day, I worked at the Federal Trade Commission, where I was responsible for writing part of the agency's budget, and then the unfortunate task of living within it. And I actually got to live through Jimmy Carter's first year of zero-based budgeting. Some of you may remember that. It was an interesting experiment, let's put it that way. After that, I was general counsel for the Washington Star newspaper, where through some happenstance, I wound up in charge of all their pension plans and all their health and welfare plans. With a pension plan, you're actually trying to plan 40 years into the future. It's kind of scary, but I had to do it. And finally, as I said in my opening remarks, I was with a law firm for over 30 years where we didn't make a dime until every bill got paid. And if that doesn't focus your attention, nothing will. Okay, so that's pretty much it for me.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown?
Thank you. As previously stated, I worked in broadcasting. That's in radio and television. What I had to do, I had the responsibility for judging the amount of money that was going to come into the market, then how much of that money I was going to take out of the market, then who I was going to hire as talent to put the programming together that would meet the need so I could take the money from the other guys. That's how it was. But I was held responsible for that by a very greedy corporation, in most cases, that wanted to make sure that those budgets were hit. My butt was on the line all the time for not only making the revenue goals, but keeping the expense goals, and the most important of all, profit. That's what it was all about. So I have had a lot of experience with budgeting process. Our budgeting process here is quite extensive. Back to another factor with an HOA, I served on a very small HOA. I was president of that. It was about 40 homes, not 4,257. But we went through some difficulties there trying to get our community, which had a pit gravel road. If any of you are familiar with that, it's dust everywhere. Trying to get the community united to agree to pay $1,200 a piece back in the 70s to have that road paved so we could turn it over to the state. That was a great challenge. And it was tough for everybody, just like some of our projects are here. But as far as budgeting and being responsible for it, I've been there many, many years under the gun for such things. We will look at it extremely close here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Logan.
Would you read the question, please, on number 8?
What prior experience have you had with being responsible for budgeting, implementing budget, and supervising expenditures by personnel?
Before I came here, I was on the board of 2 other HOAs, which we always came in on budget. Basically, I can put my other hat on again. For 6 years, I've been looking at the budgets. I've been in the budget process. That's 3 days in chairs like this. And you know what that means. And we've talked about it. We've run things over and things like that. I know what the budget's been for the past 6 years. As I say, I was chair 1 year. And we have sent things to the, reports to the board. And we can't change it because we suggest things, but basically falling on deaf ears. But the fact of the matter is that I would be on the other side, and I would really look very hard at what the finance committee, and there's some great people on there, great experience in finances, and look at it and give it a lot of credence. And I think that's what's been missing, so we can know what money we have and let everyone else know what money they have. Because my chief financial officer, my wife tells me how much money I have because I get my allowance every week. And the 4,257 people should be able to look on the website and say, this is what we're spending, so they can understand it and they can see when it's out of whack. And maybe we'll get more people to come in because they understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dedman.
I've done quite a bit of design and construction work in my lifetime. Over $1 billion worth of projects. But the most humbling experience I can tell you is to stand there in front of a homeowner, having owned my own company for 10 years, that I didn't properly budget for her job. So I'm very conscious about understanding people's needs and wants and understanding, giving them a number, a physical number that they can understand, that they can live with, and that they know that I can meet. And that is probably the most important thing.
Thank you, sir. We're going to start a new question now. We're going to start off with Mr. Furley. Should the board refuse to approve any one-source contract before they have seen at least 3 competitive bids?
That's a real easy answer. No. You need competitive bids. Period. The end. Common sense tells you that. Do I need to say more?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Priester?
I wholeheartedly agree that competition is what keeps the price low, and you'd be surprised how some contractors will have some interesting ideas that can actually bring the price even lower. So I'm all for competition, and yes, 3 competitive bids as a minimum.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ternay?
Absolutely, the same thing. And even then, those budgeted, or those bids have to be looked at. You can't always go with the lowest, because there are some other benefits that a higher bid might be able to provide if you can live within the budget, if you can fit that higher figure within the budget. But you should definitely have 2 or 3 at an absolute minimum, and get details of just what that budget is going to cover. One of the things that I've been very concerned with is our lack of visibility and on this Clerk of the Works project. The highest bidder on the original project came in and got the contract. I believe it's over 15 months for a 12-month project, costing us over $150,000. They were the highest bidder, and when the requirements were changed, I don't think we got a bid at all from the other 3 that were lower. The bidder that ended up getting it ended up with a higher bid for a lower commitment than what the lowest bid was for the higher commitment. So that's got to change.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gerks?
As a general rule, you want competitive bidding. There's no doubt about it. Some circumstances you get into where you're limited. I think that with this project, we're now going under the Clark project. We tried to get multiple bids. We wound up, because of where we are not inside the metropolitan Washington area. We're not inside the Richmond metropolitan area. We wound up with 2. Rebidding the process probably would have had an adverse effect on the total cost, because we have a lot of cost pressure going on right now. I would say, as a general rule, you want competitive bidding. There are circumstances where, for whatever reason, it's not going to work out, but the general rule should be competitive bidding. And sometimes, because of the nature of the work, the best bid may not be the lowest one. I remember Alan Shepard, when he was on the top of that rocket, they asked him later what he was thinking about, and he said it had crossed his mind that every bidder was the lowest bidder on the project, and he was sitting on top of a rocket. So sometimes you don't necessarily want the lowest bidder, you want the best one, but competitive bidding is the way to go if you can possibly do it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown?
Yes, competitive bidding obviously is always welcome for all of us, and we want to have that. I will point out that we do have a very extensive procurement policy here, which was recently updated. As long as we follow the procurement policy, we will be in good shape. Within that procurement policy, there is a justification page for instances where Walt mentioned, such as our tub grinding. To get someone to drag that machine over here to the middle of Locust Grove to grind up our debris at 9.9, and everybody's not willing to drag that thing but so many miles. So we have a very well thought out, well designed procurement policy, and within that there is provision for such times when you can't get 3 competitive bids, a single source justification. But I am in favor, obviously, of the competitive bidding. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Logan?
Yes, our procedures for bidding and all do allow for a one bid if there's no one else that can perform it. That's the only exception, and I agree we should have at least 3 bids. And the problem I think with even asking this question is we've had too many sole source bids, and I think it should be more transparent as to why people are not bidding. Because on a $5 million project, I'm pretty sure somebody would haul the truck an extra 17 miles or whatever it is. Yes, we should have at least 3, and if not, we have to rebid. And if it costs us more money, I don't think so. I think by getting more, you probably get a lower price. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Devin?
We need 3 qualified bids. And I think that's where a lot of the issues are being of a concern. We sometimes get 3 bids, but I'm not sure that they are necessarily qualified bidders.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Brown?
I think it's great to be last for this one. I agree with everybody. I've been sitting here trying to think under what circumstance that I would agree with a sole source bid. Perhaps, as I think as Jim Logan said, there might be one, but I mean, I'm really having to scratch my head. I think competition does bring the prices down and the quality up. I want to thank you all for these questions because you are really giving us great insight into what is really on your minds. And the fiscal responsibility of this community is paramount, and you're entrusting that to your board. Your board and the general manager who is hired by your board. So it is clear to all 8 of us how important this is. And again, I agree with the folks that I think competition is good, and that's what we need to have. And I would like to follow our policies that state 3. I'll caveat that with quality bids. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll start a new question, and we're going to start with Mr. Priester. This is a rather long one, so. Members, as well as the directors, have lately expressed the opinion that LOA needs to improve its communications. Do you agree with this assessment? If so, what specifically do you consider a present form of communication that the association can improve, and how would we go about improving it?
Wow. Short answer is yes. Communication can always be improved, as well as the transparency. For me, I know when I have tried to find things on the website, it's not exactly intuitive, and I'm in IT. I should know better. So I'm thinking that a little bit of money spent on a little better web design, and a repository for the documents that are there, and an index that would help us to find the information that it is there. We just have to find it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chernoy?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion going on in a couple of the committee meetings right now about increased communication. I am not an IT guy. I'm lucky I could learn how to turn the computer on, let alone do anything with it. So that's a handicap that I have. The understanding that I have is very limited in what they're trying to do in getting additional communication available to the people, but this is under study right now. It's looked at from a cost standpoint, some of it with advertising involved with it, some of it not. That obviously without the advertising it costs more to do it. So it's an ongoing project, and I'm not in a position right now to be able to make any kind of a definite yes or no on that. Again, one of our standing committees is giving this lots of consideration, and that will be coming down the road during this next coming year. So it'll be necessary for all of us, any of us elected, to keep up with that and make recommendations and get feedback from the general population as to what's going to work.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dirks?
Well, I kind of can you hear me now? I kind of addressed this in my opening statement when I talked about in the budget area and in the ongoing financial statement area, we need to do better. No doubt that we need to do better. And I've described some examples. Information should be up there with regard not only to the budget, but with regard to ongoing finances. Every month, the reports, that information can be online. Right now, you have to go down again to the Holcomb building, and there's binders full of this information, but it's not really available anywhere else. You gotta put it online. beyond that, you have any other things that are theoretically online. For example, if you want to look at the procurement policy, it is online, but the way that it's organized is by the dates things were passed by the board. So you have to sort of look around to figure out where it is. There's a search function which is new, which is great, which has been added very recently. That's helped a lot. But even that needs some refinement because I found a little difficulty in using it. So we're making progress here, but the big thing is the example. You want an example? I already gave it to you in my opening statement. Put the financial information online so we all can find out what's going on with the budget, where the money's being spent, without having to truck down to the Holcomb building and wade through paper copies and have to pay for them if we want our own personal copy to bring home and study.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown?
Well, we have several current methods of communicating. Our lake currents is something that not many communities our size do as often. We also have the website, we'll get to that in a moment, the opt-in for the emails. A lot of information can be shared that way. I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 1,200 people that have opted in for that. Not everybody does do that. Sign up for the email notifications of all of the things that are going on. That would not probably be the place for financial statements, as has been brought up, but the website certainly would. There is a new search function. There are improvements that can be made to the website, but the website is one of several resources we have. On all of those, the financial information in the lake currents, the board minutes, et cetera, in there. In an honest show of hands, how many read the lake currents of it? Good, thank you. Now, this is probably the 20% of the population that does, but the information is there. There is a lot more information that can be shared on the website, and that would be a good thing. I hope we can encourage more people to opt in for our email blast. It's the same with our Dwelling Live, trying to get more people to use that to alleviate pain at the front gate. We have these tools available, but we haven't gotten everybody on board with them yet. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Logan?
That's a good question. I have a master's degree, and when I was going to college, one of the things that always hit me is if you're in a large class and you have a professor up there, he just tells you what he wants you to hear, but everybody can talk to him. And when we go to board meetings, we get up the podium, we get 3 minutes, and we were told we have now missive they read, and one of the things that one of the board members says that by law we can't ask questions. We also have a meeting on Tuesday or Wednesday sometimes that at night at 7 o'clock. I don't know, but a lot of people work to take the VRE, to get on 95 and hope they die early. They have children to get off to school, so people don't show up. Saturdays is a good day, and I know there's soccer practice and things like that, but I like the way that they're streaming it now and things like that. But again, it's like being in the classroom. You can't ask questions. I like the way we're doing it here. Why don't we have a place where you can write your question down and drop it, or again, of course, emails, and you'll get an answer, but be specific. Or why don't we have a members' town hall meeting where that's the only thing we do? And after we say the Pledge of Allegiance, why don't we turn it over to the members so that they don't feel intimidated and viewpoint. If you looked at the paper, we have viewpoints, 175 words? Yeah, I think they're counting periods too. But the thing of it is there's a wall now. Let's have town hall meetings, and let's have people get there. And if we have to do cards, that's fine, but let's open and knock. And what did Kennedy say? Let's knock down this wall. Oh, no, that was Reagan, right? Let's knock down this wall. There's no communication.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Devin.
Obviously, I agree with Jim. What has always confounded me as to what the board or the GM decides what can be published and what can't be published. There are certain requirements within the state that tells you what information cannot be published. Other than that, I'm still scratching my head to understand who decides what can or cannot be put out there. So I think that's the first problem we need to address. The technology is there. It's there, it could be refined, it could be used, but we have to decide as a community what we want to be able to put out there. And all the information should be there unless there is something specifically not allowed to be addressed.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Brown?
So the last two board meetings, I've talked about the issue here with communication. So, and here's what I told them. There's 3 methods right now, probably a few more. Lake currents, out twice a week. Summary of a lot of issues that doesn't give you really the meat and potatoes. The LOA.org website up until the 17th of July, when I told them that was woefully out of date. Up until then, if you looked on, for instance, the CART project, the last update at that point in time was 20 June. It is now updated every week. So I think that is very good, and I commend the Communications Committee and WAC and other folks that are keeping that up to date now. The other one is Channel 18, and that has just been a challenge for a lot of us. So one of the things that I have learned over the last few months that I decided to run for the board was this community demands communication. They demand information. It needs to be pushed out to you rather than you pulling it out of, name it, the board, the general manager, whomever. So my suggestion to the general manager, and I've told them twice now, is after the new board is installed in September, you have a town hall. And that purpose is to meet your new board members, new president, new everybody, and that is solely focused on what's on your mind. Questions, good things, bad things, things that we need to improve. And then you do that 6 months later with a vector check of how we're doing. I think that besides that, if we do focus workshops where we have, perhaps something on the dam, perhaps something on maybe the 4-bay concept, but focus workshops, then you come to the ones that you're interested in. I think, again, pushing out the information to everybody will go a long way. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Furley?
Well, I can make a few suggestions here. Having a town hall every 6 months, we probably need one a little more often than that. But besides lake currents and going into LOWA.org, which are all good things, I suggest that people, if they have something on their mind, go to a finance committee meeting, a planning committee meeting, sit in the audience. And they usually take comments at the end of the committee meetings, but if you're not satisfied, send me an email, lowercase letters, FETERLE@AOL.com. And I will look into it, and if we can put something together, and if enough people show enough interest on a certain category or a certain item, then maybe we could call a town hall meeting sooner than every 6 months. So it would be on as a needed basis. And that's basically what I got to say about that. So if I can, thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're going to start a new question, and this time it's with Mr. Tenwari, okay? This pretty well follows suit with the last question that we had, so there's some similarities here. Would you give an example of how a decision or a spending plan can be presented in a way that helps members understand and engages the support of lot owners?
Well, the first thing you get out is communicate. Is it me?
No.
Oh, I think so.
Terry's
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm perfectly willing to let him go first.
Oh, no. You've waited this long, so.
I really don't know how to answer that question. The budget process, again, takes 2 months, and everyone has feedback into it. My answer to that would be similar to his, that I will give my cell phone number and my 2 email addresses to anybody who wants them. I'll give my address to anyone. They want to show up and talk to me for man to man or man to woman or person to person. I will be more than happy to do that and to give my justification for any decision that I make or support.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dirks?
Sure, I can you hear me?
No.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Better.
Oh. Okay, now it's on. I think we have 2 examples that are going to be coming up in a relatively short order. One is the pond on the 14th fairway, which is designed to protect the small lake. The other is the Forebay project at the Flat Run end of the lake that's going to have to deal with the environmental issues, including silt and phosphorus and other things. Both of those are going to be significant. Obviously, the Forebay one at down Flat Run is much more significant, not only because of the cost implications and the alternatives that might be available, but also because of the impact it conceivably could have on the landowners in that area. And I think that we really need to go through those carefully, and so that everybody really understands exactly what we're doing and understands the cost implications. So those are projects where, because of the nature, we're trying to protect our lakes. Deciding we don't want to spend any money at all isn't really an option. We have to do it right, but I think we also need to involve the community, particularly with the Forebay one, because if that is next to where you live, obviously you're going to care about it an awful lot. And I know the board has tried to be very sensitive about this, but we're still at the point where it's kind of conceptual. We don't have the details yet, and when we get further along, I think we really need to go over these things carefully in an open forum where people can get their questions answered, and we can get feedback, particularly from the people who are actually going to be closely affected by it. But those are the 2 examples, the Forebay down at Flat Run being the more significant one.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown?
I'm afraid that question was asked so long ago, I have not retained what it was. Please repeat it.
Would you please give an example of how a decision on a spending plan can be presented in a way that helps members understand and engages the support of lot owners?
It gets down to dollars and cents for everything. For instance, the Clark project, that's the most a hot topic we have. It's 52 cents a day when you break it down that way, or as Terry said, $15 a month. What value does it add to the value of our homes? Perhaps it's 2%. On a $100,000 home, that's $2,000. Everything explained in dollar and cents, yes. How you explain it, what is the benefit? What is, when the procurement policy I mentioned, when we go into a project, there has to be a cost justification as well. The example that Walt just gave about the Forebay project, the 2 most valuable assets we have are the lakes. If we don't take care of those, there is no Lake of the Woods. Everything we have, just if it's well explained, well in advance, and the meetings, the town hall meetings were brought up. There has been talk recently for the future board. The older board used to have 1 meeting a month where we had a meeting of where things were voted on. There was 1 meeting a month that was simply a workshop where members just like this could come, ask questions of the board. There might be a topic put out, the dam, the Clark, the Forebay, whatever that topic might be, but it was for member input. That would be something I would be highly in favor of, is going back to 1 business meeting a month where we voted on matters, 1 meeting a month where we heard input directly from members on what is on their mind. And those are the types of situations we can sit down one-on-one or in a group like this and say, this is what we're thinking about, this is how we see it, this is how it's going to affect each of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Logan?
I believe that the best thing that we can do is that we should get out all the information at one time, what the bids were, how much it's going to cost, and not keep just telling people, this is what we're going to do. We don't want the input. This is what we're telling you, and we're going to do it. And that's what's causing the problem here. We've got projects coming up, and we don't even know how much it's going to cost. We're borrowing $5 million, but that's just for construction. What about the soft issues? You know, chairs, this, things like that. We don't know. We don't know, we had some soil samples. You know, a lot of people don't understand that new pool was 3.5 feet for 53 feet. Then you got another few feet for 5 foot, and it ends at 6 foot. I would hope they don't have any, the Barracudas don't have any races, because they're going to crack your skull at the 3.5 trying to spin around. I think they need to let the people know everything, not just tell them what we're going to do, and they have to take that in consideration. And if the members approve it, and we found that's hard to do, but the members approve it, that they can decide whether or not we need to do it this way, we should pay this much, and how much equity it's going to make on our lots, and how much our values are going to go up. And that's not been happening for years. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dedman.
I agree with Pete and Walt that the Forebay and the 14th Fairway Pond is a major issue. They're complex issues which are sometimes hard to explain in simple terms, but we somehow need to have the community understand the benefit of the dollars that they are spending. Once they understand the benefit, then I think the entire community will get behind a project. Without understanding the benefit, it's very hard to convince somebody that they in fact it's important to the overall community.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Brown?
I'm going to have you repeat the question one
Yes,
more
ma'am.
time to
Yes,
make sure I answer the question.
Would you give an example of how a decision or a spending plan can be presented in a way that helps members understand and engages the support of lot owners?
Okay, so the question is how a decision would be presented to the members. So what I would do is I would first make sure that the members understood what the issue is, and there's plenty of them that we just talked about with the Forebay project and the 14th hole. The first thing is to educate everyone on what the issue is. What do we need to do? What options are available? What happens if we don't do this? Do we need to do it now? What happens if we don't do it now? Do we need to do it? Can we do it 3 years from now, 5 years from now? I think we need to lay out all of this information, get a clear understanding of what the problem is, a clear understanding of the repercussions of not doing it in a timely manner and defining that. I'm amazed at the expertise that's resident here within the community, and engineers, name it. I mean, architects, we've got an incredible wealth of expertise here. Leverage that. A lot of those folks are on committees, some of those folks are not, but leverage that expertise to find out exactly what those options are. How much is it going to be? How much will it be in today's dollars? How much will it be if we do it 3 years from now? And how much is it going to cost you? And if it's going to cost you, how do we make this affordable across, I don't care what your background is, across all of our members, because we are one community. And again, I do agree with, we've got to take care of our lakes. We have a lot of issue with our lakes, and if we don't have our lakes taken care of, I don't know what we become. Crater of the woods, deep hole of the woods. But again, it's about educating everybody on what the problem is and why we must fix it, and doing that together. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Fertley, you want to take another shot at this one?
Well, first of all, I want to apologize to Terry. I thought you were making eye contact because I looked at you and I thought you were starting a new question. That's why I went like that and I started talking. So you all have to forgive me. I'm sorry. I'm getting old. What we're talking about here boils down again to communication. The definition of communication is the sender is sending a message to the receiver. Whatever you have in your mind, you want to use the words, the right semantics, that the receiver is comprehending exactly what you're trying to tell them. And then you want feedback. So the main thing would be, what do we need to do? Why do we need to do it? How are we going to do it? When do we need to do it by? And then we got to check into what's called feasibility, financial planning, where, geographics, etc. And this involves every one of you, all 4,000 and whatever, homes, homeowner, lot owners, which is what, about 12,000 people, would you say, with kids? So it's a two-way street. The board has to communicate with you. Let's put it this way. The members here make any board responsible for the operations day-to-day through the manager and the amenities and maintaining same to the best of their ability. When you make somebody responsible, you have to give them commensurate authority. They go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. But the problem is, I think some people that think when they're on the board, they're in an authoritative position and you're going to love it. Don't worry about it. We're going to make it. Oh, yeah. So again, we're back to communication. And again, FETERLE. Suggestions, comments, criticism, send to me. I'll give you my best answer. And if I don't know the answer, I'll seek it out and get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Priester?
Wow, that's some great input from my fellow candidates. About the only thing that I can probably add at this time is during the budget process. The budget process that I've followed in my project management and program management years always included a justification step. After a cost has been assigned to a particular project, then it had needed to be justified in terms of revenue and return on investment. And I think that the projects that come up, particularly from the general manager and his staff, need to have that justification. That justification be communicated to you, the members, so that we all can come to consensus on whether that project needs to move forward or not as part of the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I believe this will be our last question. And again, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Dirks, okay? This is a rather long one because it has 4 examples in it too, but I'd like to read the whole thing so you get the entire picture. How should the board implement quality control metrics to prevent maintenance and construction problems caused by incompetence, lack of attention, carelessness, and failure to follow through? Example 1, frozen sprinkler system at the clubhouse, January 2018. Number 2, failure of HVAC at Wood Center, winter of 2018. Number 3, contractors non-conforming work, various projects. And number 4, inadequate maintenance. Again, I'll repeat the question only. How should the board implement quality control metrics to prevent maintenance and construction problems caused by incompetence, lack of attention, carelessness, and failure to follow through? This is a final one. This is a honey.
You got about 5 hours. I could get into this. Interestingly enough, let me hit the last one first. Once again, engineer. If you want to drive an engineer crazy, there's a very simple way to do it. Talk about deferred maintenance. It drives us nuts. But that's been handled to some extent by the fact that we have a repair and replacement reserve, a repair and replacement policy. What we're talking through here is follow through. A lot of these maintenance things, it's really looking at what are our procedures generally for how we operate our facilities. We need to look at that because obviously we've had some examples of things that if you have procedures in place, you're not relying on people remembering things. The example I can give you is an airplane. When an airline pilot goes to take an airplane flight, as the pilot, he doesn't sit in the cockpit and try to remember what he's supposed to do. There's a checklist. It's been developed. You go through the checklist. It sounds like what I'm hearing here is we're short on checklists for how we do things. It's procedural. We have to work with the general manager to identify these things and say, where are the weaknesses in our procedures? They have to be written down. We have to treat it no differently than an airline pilot treats going over his airplane before he takes a flight.
Thank you. I thought I was the only one who was going to use an airplane analogy today. What I would say is that the 4 examples you gave sounded to me like all of those were outside contractors, not our own maintenance staff as far as mess-ups or things such as that. I think we have a very competent staff that does good work. However, if you've got a contractor, then something blows up like that, for whatever reason, the checklist is there. These things did happen. The HVAC system went out. The sprinkler system did go out. Whoever is in charge of maintenance, the maintenance committees, the management, our facilities director, Jesse, these should be checked. There should be a checklist. All of those things, I assume, were tested. I think with the sprinkler system, it had to do with insulation. Not enough insulation in the ceiling where there was a sprinkler system put in. I'm not 100% sure on that. So, but all of these things are checked whenever you have a contractor. If you have work done at your home, there is a check time. You check it over at the end of that period. There is a period in which they are due to replace and repair. Call them back. You build a home in Lake of the Woods, within 1 year, your contractor is supposed to take care of any items on a punch list. We just need to make sure that we hold all of our outside contractors accountable for any work they do in here, so that we're not relying on our own insurance company to pay for those mistakes, that the companies that do the work should pay for the mistakes. Thank you.
Mr. Logan?
There you go. Well, let's see, we had the Sweetbriar pool. They pumped all the water out and they broke the back of the pool. We had the sprinkler system. We had the water system just installed, and they didn't put any insulation on it. And we moved the fitness center into the basement of the restaurant, and it flooded out. And it appears that we're writing checks for completed work, and nobody ever checked to see if it was completed. So I think we should have somebody that's supposed to be doing that to make sure the work is done, the punch list is finished, before we write him a check, instead of waiting to see if it blows up and then say, oh, he didn't do his job. I think it goes back to, we need to have somebody that's supposed to do the job and okayed it and did the punch list, held accountable, because the pool cost us what, $500,000? God knows how much the water damage was when the pipes failed and stuff, and the HAV. That's something that it's going to be very hard. In the Sweetbriar pool, we didn't even go after the person's insurance. We used our own. So something's wrong, and it starts about who checked it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Denman?
Yeah, I certainly agree with Jim. There should be a process in place to back check contractors, understand their work, understand their scope of work to start with, and be able to come in prior to a final payment and look at the work that they've done and verify that it has been done in accordance. Back checking and understanding what it is that you have contracted to do is vital. And in the context that some of the issues on the maintenance side, we have a director of facilities that should be checking these things. I'm assuming she has enough staff available to do that job. But if that's not the case, as we continue to go on these projects, then maybe the issue is to hire some additional staff to help her out. I don't know that that's something that we'd have to look at.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Brown?
So I think the way the question was answered was because there is a perception that it's not a bunch of isolated incidents, rather it's a trend. And two things that I've heard from others, which is, one is there's checklists. Many of us have always followed checklists, and then holding individuals accountable. And I mean really holding people accountable and not just lip service to that. In the military, we have a saying, a commander is responsible for all things a unit does or fails to do. And there are consequences, and there are severe consequences. But it seems to me that accountability is a bit lacking. And I say that because if you're responsible for an amenity and you're over the budget year after year after year, and there's no accountability, then I say that we, there's an area that we need to shore up. And so if that's true in the maintenance field, then again, holding individuals accountable is what we need to do. I always used to tell my soldiers, in God we trust, all else we check, and I always check. And again, I think holding people accountable will get to the root of the problem.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Furley?
I'm going to take it in a reverse order from the 4 examples you gave. Maintenance. Maintenance falls upon our M&E personnel, not so much the committee. They put input, but the manager, that comes under managerial staff. You can't put pipes in above a false ceiling and a roof with no insulation and not expect the pipes to burst if the temperature goes down to 3 above 0. I mean, this is just, again, common sense, okay? Now, that's for the clubhouse frozen sprinkler system on New Year's. I know I was there because we put on a little skit. Right 2 hours later, the ceiling came down where we were standing. That could have been, you talk about throwing a wet blanket on a performance, I'll tell you. Now, last winter, it was cold, and people were complaining. They're going into the fairway to eat breakfast or lunch, and it's 50 degrees in there. They had to bring in portable heaters. They ran the tubes up into the vents to make heat. Again, insulation. There should be about an R19 up there. Get that Pink Panther stuff. Make it about 19 inches thick. It'll be warm and toasty in the winter, and it'll be cool in the summer. When we had this last heat wave, I went in there, you sit down, and you're starting to drip. I mean, the heat goes this way, and the coldness goes that way. It's just, again, common sense. Now let's get to the contractor part. A general contractor comes in, and he'll bid on a project, whatever it is. He doesn't do all the work. He subs it out. He has different subcontractors. Well, you get in a contract, you have to stipulate, and you want what is called a performance bond. If the job isn't completed in the time allocated and the work is substandard, it's not our expense, it falls on them. He goes after the subs, the general contractor, though, he's liable. So if you let a contract, and I guess they did for that sprinkler system, there was no performance bond included in the writing. Stupid. So again, common sense. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. Mr. Priester?
Okay, I have to agree with Ms. Brown as far as finding people, making sure that people are accountable, for these items. Now, how do you do that? Well, let's go back to my out-of-the-box idea in my opening remarks. I don't know if anyone has looked at the employee manual for the Lakewood Woods Association employees, and you look at the performance evaluation section. It's very, very loosey-goosey, not much to it. However, if we were to expand the performance evaluation section there to include certain incentives and certain disincentives, along with the goals and objectives, for the year that they're, following, it always gets a person's attention, in their pocketbook. So, by having that and having it tracked as far as the metrics go, I think this would get someone's attention and start on paper making sure that the people are accountable, up through the general manager and his immediate staff. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chernoy?
I guess now I'm everyone's favorite speaker, the last. Your mind can only absorb what your posterior can endure, and I'm sure all of you are ready to get up and stretch. Again, accountability. But in order to have accountability, you have to have somebody who is knowledgeable enough to inspect what has been done. If you don't have somebody who knows what they're doing to go in and look at it, it doesn't matter how bad or how good the project is, the person inspecting isn't going to be able to determine that degree of competence. One of the things I would suspect that we should have had was county inspections on anything that required permits. So if that sprinkler system required a permit to install or repair, then somebody from the county should have come in. I just finished a project for one of my neighbors, and they had to call a county in for inspection 2 times on some electrical work that I looked at and said that it was not done right. But I knew what I was looking for, and I advised the homeowner that they better contact the county and have them come in, because there was supposed to be a contract, or supposed to be a permit on that. There was never a permit, and the subcontractor or the contractor that did the work had to come back 2 more times to get it right. So it all comes down to having competent people looking at a project when it's done before approving that. So it's a two-edged street. The people doing it have to be doing it right, and you have to know what you're looking for.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
And that concludes the candidate forum for today. Thank you all for coming and participating with your questions, and to thank the candidates for their time and their excellent responses.
Okay, I'll look at that part.